The following are an extensive list of the most notable and historical examples of state waste and unnecessary expenditure, ranging from shelved and failed projects to those being nothing more than money black holes, all costing the tax-paying Irish public millions over the years. Millions of which that could have been better spent elsewhere on housing, education, health and infrastructure. 50 years ago, on January 1st, 1973, Ireland formally joined the European Economic Community, today being the European Union. There are many die-hard supporters within the political circles of Ireland and Europe who will extol ardently and excessively the benefits of EU membership. The people of Ireland are continuously bombarded by the Irish government with propaganda as to why they are lucky to be a part of the EU, for all the social, educational and infrastructural programs and funding it provides, making Ireland to look poor, under-resourced, and utterly reliant on its membership, when nothing could be further from the truth. It provides a convenient smokescreen to hide true activities of the state, being major tax haven operations, abuse of EU grants and funding, the placating of banks as well as vulture funds, and assorted property developers in the buying up and controlling of state resources to hide behind. This propaganda appearing alongside practically every social, educational and infrastructural project and initiative is a ploy to lull a naive and uninformed public into a general and false sense of what the role of the EU is in the lives of European citizens, particularly those of Ireland. Anything beyond that being the business and concerns of government and affiliated professionals. Over time, however, the European Union has more and more proven itself to be a bad deal for members, becoming increasingly dictatorial in its policies and approaches to member state welfare and socio-economic activity. It has become an all-invasive presence in the everyday lives of the citizens of member states, having control over essential areas of prosperity, such as fiscal and financial policy, agriculture and fishing, as well as immigration and border control. Other major areas being dictated to Ireland and member countries are that of green initiatives and objectives based upon climate alarmism, with programmes being funded in the tens of millions to have the Irish people be made accept such socio-economic conditions at the sacrifice of traditional and generational sources of income and sustenance, such as the peat industry, as well as increases in carbon tax affecting everything from farming to manufacturing, utilities and logistics. This constant theme of climate alarmism and carbon footprint reduction continues elsewhere through a framework of funding in the millions to university partners and qualifying applicants, given on the condition of working on projects for these areas. The reality for Ireland being an EU member is much the same for many others, with funding being conditional on member states meeting agreed milestones to reform their economies, in order to make intended green and digital transitions, with payment being conditional on the achievement of pledged reforms to make the overall EU economy more resilient. This has become even more so in the aftermath of COVID-19. Given the evidence, all of the political parties, most notably Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, down through the years, continue to give full allegiance and commitment to the European Union ideology, framework and goals, no matter the outcome or costs to national identity or sovereignty. This cross-party consensus of fanatical devotion to push the boundaries of allowing EU power come close to overstepping and overrule national legislation has revealed itself time and again in recent years, with extreme leftist and globalist ideologies taking the place of more pressing everyday concerns of housing, the family unit and standard of living for the Irish people.
And the bitter truth is that the European Parliament has done a lot of damage in Europe. It has been sending a false message. It represents European demos. There isn't and there won't be any European demos. The Parliament infected Europe with shameless partisanship. And the infection became so contagious that it spread to other institutions, such as European Commission. The Parliament has abandoned the basic function of representing people. Instead, it has become a machine to implement the so-called European project, thus alienating millions of voters. The Parliament has become a political vehicle of the left to impose their monopoly with their fierce intolerance towards any dissenting view. No matter how many times you repeat the word diversity, diversity is becoming an extinct species in the European Union, and particularly in this chamber. The Parliament is a quasi-parliament because it rejects the essential principle of parliamentarism, namely accountability. The deputy, let me remind you, is elected by the voters and must be accountable to the voters that elected him. Not so in the European Union. The idea that, say, Spanish, German, French, etc. deputies accountable to their own national electorates can dictate something to, shall we say, a Hungarian society or any other society to which they cannot be held accountable and which cannot take them to task is simply preposterous. Call it what you will, but democracy it is not. To sum up, the Parliament represents the demos that does not exist, works for the project that ignores reality and law, shuns accountability, turns its back on millions of people, and serves the interest of one political orientation. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case.
Ireland in particular finds itself in a position of dwindling returns over the years, despite the actions of those in power adhering to the EU's wishes. Being among the smallest of member states has seen it shoulder over 40% of the 2008 global financial crisis, EU bank bailouts. Ireland has also been a net contributor since 2013, overpaying on its membership, getting less and less in return since. Ireland is in fact among the highest contributors per capita to the European Union, with payments increasing since net contributions began in 2013, paying to €0.5 billion in 2018, as an example. RTE recently claimed Ireland has only been contributing for the past 3 years, which is untrue, acting as the government propaganda arm to quell any argument or objection to Ireland's EU membership. That's a cost of €9,000 for every man, woman and child. €21 billion of the state's pension fund was raided to support this bailout. The EU to this day have given back only €42 billion, making Ireland a net loser in membership. Another major factor being how interest rates, as controlled by the EU government, benefit the largest members of France and Germany. So, in the event of economic boom and bust, Ireland are at the mercy of the European Central Bank, with no economic sovereignty, not having its own currency. Another well-noted and key issue being Irish fisheries, worth billions, being fully in control of the EU, with member state fishing fleets allowed to plunder, wholesale, Irish fishing waters, while Ireland receives only a fraction of profits, and the native fishing industry suffering to the point of near extinction as a result. Irish farming is tracked and monitored by an EU satellite grid, being made to uphold standards, rules and regulations under EU scrutiny, pressure and demands, while also being paid large grants not to farm, but instead rewild their farmlands in the name of ludicrous green policies of climate change and global warming. Ireland has some of the best agriculture in Europe, indeed the world. It has world-famous beef and dairy. Despite this, tons of fruit and vegetables are imported that could simply be grown natively. This is done so according to Irish and EU government wishes, indeed contradictory to their supposed green initiatives. In fact, the EU has a stranglehold over the entire Eurozone farming sector, dictating what can and can't be produced. Studies have shown up to 80% of funds go to 20% of farmers. The rest caters to EU government needs and vested pharmaceutical, as well as other lobbying interests. Ireland exports huge quantities of raw produce, cattle, and other livestock, rather than adding value through the manufacturing and marketing of finished products. There is little support or government incentive to help small to medium enterprises or homegrown businesses. The Irish civil service and public agencies have a laissez-faire attitude to industrial strategy to foster local industry and job growth, particularly in the face of a Brexit future. Again, an over-reliance on foreign direct investment and European Union industrial policy is proof of such.
You destroy the European economy and agriculture, Europe becomes an open-air museum in terms of agriculture. Us, Europeans, are becoming poorer and poorer because of you. You are the face of the Migration Pact, and I'm talking to you as a woman to a woman, as a mother to a mother. How can you not be ashamed of promoting the Migration Pact, which means that millions of women and children in Europe feel endangered, threatened on the streets of their cities? You are responsible for every rape, every violent attack, every tragedy caused by illegal migrants, because you are inviting them to come to Europe. And for what you're doing, you should actually go to prison and not to the European Commission. Your presence as the President of the European Commission means a further collapse of the European Union. What do we think about your European Green Deal? This is what we think about this. This is what we think about the Migration Pact. You're not even looking at me. That's a shame. We want a Europe of free and sovereign nations, and not a sick leftist ideology. And all the soldiers that are defending the eastern border deserve a bow, a very deep bow from you.
The EU has brazenly grown more and more dictatorial, despotic, and totalitarian since its founding, in areas of lawmaking, farming, as well as environmental and social issues. The EU's latest and most brazen display of among its true purpose and agenda has come to light in the using of EU members' state taxes without their say or consent, in the funding of the Ukraine-Russian war, stoking conflict and loss of human life in place of striving for peace deals and diplomacy.
Billions of EU assistance going to Ukraine are not free, they're loans, which Ukraine will default on, and they come with neoliberal strings attached. If you listen to The Economist, Ukraine is marked for a nightmare round of shock therapy, a sell-off of public land, deregulation of labour, sale of public assets, on it goes. The country's future is being sold to finance a proxy war that's tearing it apart. And of course the loans have preconditions that Ukraine must uphold democracy and rule of law, but since the tap was turned on, Zelensky has banned most opposition parties, shuttered the media, attacked trade unions and workers' rights, but the billions keep flowing. This is a country our Court of Auditors have said was a country accused of grand corruption. And on it goes while the EU policy seems designed to prevent peace and keep the war going at all costs as long as ordinary people pay. So between Russian tanks and European banks, there will be little left of Ukraine when this is over. Don't forget, war is a racket and there's going to be hell to pay for this one.
The EU, through such actions of its political and business members and lobbyists, have proven themselves to be a clique of self-serving and profiteering despots with a facade of democracy. The political parties of Ireland, having fallen in lockstep with EU control, have gradually led to Ireland's international reputation as a safe, welcoming, healthy country to be tarnished and ruined, perhaps indefinitely. The deliberate attempt of late, as of 2021, to permanently alter the demographical landscape of the country through both legal immigration as well as through the international protection system is alarming proof of their unwavering commitment to EU control and dictates in the name of globalism. There is now also major risk of the Irish establishment losing ground in free trade and foreign direct investment due to changes in policy and attitude, both within the EU and from the US regarding offshore taxes. With no backup plan in place for cultivation of homegrown industry to take the place of foreign direct investment on a big enough scale to compensate taxes and revenue. As the EU continue to pressure the Irish establishment on the tax haven system, as explored earlier, it so heavily relies upon to fall in line with their rules and regulations, while the fear of the US and other territories lowering their corporate tax rate less than Ireland's always remaining a factor. What grounds exist for argument of Ireland to leave the EU? It's argued very little Irish sovereignty can be salvaged by leaving the EU, in fear of losing political cooperation at the EU level that would require to be replicated elsewhere in other international agreements, for a country as small as Ireland. There is also the argument that the cost of making such changes in order to maintain open trade and diplomacy with other countries outside of the EU would have its challenges. This is not altogether impossible if the outcome is to win and maintain state sovereignty, something arguably priceless and worth fighting for. The land border between North and South Ireland has become a weak link on illegal immigration post-Brexit. An obvious solution is a stricter policing on residency and deportation. Ireland has options to develop a bilateral security treaty with the UK if an exit from the EU were to happen. As of late, political parties and players, both in Ireland and Brussels, are pushing for Ireland to join NATO and sacrifice its neutrality and risk losing this opportunity of border control and sovereignty.
Godfather of the European Union, Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, published the plan for a united Europe and the ethnocide of the peoples of Europe. The encouragement of mass non-white immigration was central to the plot. Since then, an unholy alliance of leftists, capitalists and Zionist supremacists has schemed to promote immigration and miscegenation with the deliberate aim of breeding us out of existence in our own homelands. As indigenous resistance to this human genetic modification industry grows, the criminal elite seeks new ways to camouflage their project. First, their immigrant pawns were temporary guest workers. Then it was a multiracial experiment. Then they were refugees. Then the answer to a shrinking population. Different excuses, different lies. And asylum is just another one. But the real aim stays the same. The biggest genocide in human history. The final solution of the Christian European problem. This crime demands a new set of Nuremberg trials, and you people will be in the dock.
Mr. Griffin, there is a blue card for you from Mrs. Gomez, all right? Señora Gomez.
Mr. President, I'm really ashamed of the racist and xenophobic terms that were used by Mr. Griffin, and my only question to him is if he dared to make any concrete suggestions and amendments to the legislation. Is your policy serious, or are you just shouting? And I hope you will not be re-elected if you seek re-election, because it's a shame for this Parliament, the kind of statements you have just made.
Señor Griffin?
Mr. Griffin.
It's you that's shouting, because obviously the truth hurts. Yes, I will be seeking re-election. Yes, I hope to return here to speak up for the indigenous Europeans, which the founder of this place has deliberately set out to wipe out, because that is a crime. I'm telling the truth. I have a constructive suggestion to help those poor asylum seekers from Africa. Yes, make it clear they can't come here, so they don't try to cross the sea and drown in huge numbers. The best way for them is to get the banks off the backs of their countries so they can live in peace in their countries, and we Europeans can live in peace in ours. Thank you.
Gracias, señor Griffin.
Thank you.
How many refugees has Poland taken?
0.
And you're proud of that?
If you are asking me, if you're asking me about Muslims illegal immigration, none, not even one will come to Poland. Not even one if it's illegal. We took over 2 million Ukrainians who are working, who are peaceful in Poland. We will not receive even one Muslim because this is what we promised.
But I asked not about illegal immigrants, I asked about refugees. And Jean-Claude Juncker, the Commission President, says that you're racist. You sound proud of the fact that you haven't taken any refugees.
Of course, because this is what our people are expecting from our government. That's number one. This is why our government was elected. But this is why Poland is so safe. This is the reason why we had not even one terrorist attack. Look at the streets in Poland, and we can be called populists, nationalists, racists. I don't care. I care about my family and about my country.
Ms. Lochbihler,
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear leftists, I'm very happy to take part in this debate about democracy in Europe. So let me give you some example of very major democracy in Poland, over 1,000 years of tradition of Polish nation. Polish nation rejected you, dear leftists, 8 times. 8 times in a row you have lost elections in Poland. So get used to it, because you're gonna lose again. That's number one. Let me give you some data about Poland and Polish democracy. The lowest unemployment in European Union is Poland. The highest GDP after COVID in European Union is Poland. One of the lowest debts in European Union is Poland. So don't give us this rubbish about the need of educated immigration, as we heard yesterday. We don't need your doctors. We don't need your engineers. Take them all and pay for them. We don't need them. You know why? Because there's zero terrorist attacks in Poland. Why? Because there is no illegal migration in Poland. So don't give me this look. Don't give me these arguments about the populism, because this is a fact. This is your data from Eurostat. So we don't need your engineers. We don't need your doctors. Take them. Do not teach us. Do not teach us about democracy, because we know what the democracy is. So learn from Poland. Be like Poland. Thank you very much.
Another clear and present purpose for the existence of the EU has been to bring about the vision of one of its founders, Count Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi. Kalergi, of mixed Asian and Jewish background, wrote of a pan-European Europe in their book, Practical Idealism, in the 1920s, which set out his views on how he believed the abolition of European nations should be accomplished, with the formation of the European Union in the guise of peace and prosperity, oversaw by a ruling plutocracy. Kalergi's thesis soon became a movement, and with the backing of prominent bankers of the time, gained momentum and support amongst Europe's elite circles. In their book, Kalergi boldly and blatantly stated, "The European man of the future will be of mixed race. Today's races and classes will disappear owing to the disappearing of nations, time, and prejudice. The Eurasian Negroid race of the future, similar in its outward appearance to the ancient Egyptians, will replace the diversity of peoples with a diversity of individuals." Kalergi and the Pan-European Plan calls for the deliberate use of enforced and disproportionate mass immigration from non-European countries in order to bring in a pan-European single-state dictatorship and destroy the indigenous nationalities of Europe's nations. A deliberate destruction of the indigenous nations and Caucasian race of Europe through mass-enforced and unfettered multiculturalism. This, however, has been a slow and methodical plan, spanning many years, and by many means to bring about the desired result, by the lineage of globalist elites masterminding this. The basis of a European nation partnership needed to be established in order to bring about Kalergi's plan. Therefore, countries big and small were lulled into partnership and allegiance, through both diplomatic and economic grounds, in the first formation of the European Economic Community, later to become the European Union. Gradually over time, more and more conditions were set upon countries, more and more treaties to be signed and adhered to, while power became more and more centralized in Brussels, as the legislative and voting power on the economic well-being of member states was stripped away. The existing uni-parties of Ireland controlling the establishment are in full lockstep with this mass immigration plan.
It not only shows a responsibility from the south to the north to the south, but also creates a society here where we can bring in people. We have to start planning for being an island to 10 million people, and among that, bringing in people as refugees in scale, not just 200, but a much larger number than that, and managing it as we do.
This reckless and myopic mass immigration plan being carried out by this current establishment has essentially witnessed them become an anarchy-tyrannical power towards their own people, in willingly complying to the commands of their overlords of Brussels. Evidence shows clearly they are doing so at the sacrifice of Irish social cohesion and demographical landscape, while lining the pockets of profiteering native landlords, property owners, as well as international hedge and vulture funds. Ordinary working-class communities throughout the country, as of 2021, from this blatant corruption and violation of the social contract, have suffered and endured this establishment's abuse of state resources and apparatus against them. Through such actions as flouting of planning, health and safety laws, wholesale use of taxpayer monies to fund this mass immigration plan, as well as use of state police to enforce the plantation of mass immigration into communities.
I'm going!
Months since, like, we all know, yes, it is, and I'm going to finish on this, it is state-sponsored in terms of allocating accommodation to international protection applicants. But by God, and I have no problem saying this here tonight, the carry-on of people around this country who are buying these buildings and warehousing people into them, you know, I can assure you, you know, the people blowing Tralee and above and leak slipping, even in Shanballymore, can go around playing the big hard men, talking about the big bucks they're making, you know. But they would want to realise the damage they're doing to these towns. You know, they're worse than the English landlords of decades ago. They're worse than any. Their behaviour is as bad as any drug cartel. You know, we've seen the carry on of some of these people here over the last few months. You know, across the country, but particularly here in Fermoy. Shame on them. You know, yes, government has a lot to answer for, but these people are the biggest traitors out of everyone, the way they're selling out communities, and it's easy for them to sit away wherever they are and not give a shite about the people in Fermoy. But by God, they've had their answer over the last month. They had their answer here tonight. Okay?
Well, what words are they most interested to ban? What are the words that they don't want us to use? And in this context, there is one word which they absolutely don't want you to use, and that word is replacement. And that tells me that that's the whole purpose. Their anxiety to stop us using that word tells me that replacement is the right word, and the only word we really need to focus on, that's what's happening to our country. Its population is being replaced.
As well as mass immigration, working in tandem to this is the continuous and subliminal bombardment of diversity, equity and inclusion propaganda being pushed on the native Irish population by government and corporate channels, so as to accept this manufactured and forced multicultural and multinational experiment on their country, much the same of every Western nation in recent years. In 2021, 45 of the country's largest companies signed up to what was called the Elevate Pledge, effectively being an intentional initiative to create work competition for Irish people in their own homeland, by these companies pledging to hire immigrants of colour where and when instead of native Irish. There is also a relentless and ongoing push for the DEI agenda from players and figures within the NGO and academic circles of Ireland, as well as through international influences. The argument given for this mass immigration of the Third World in particular, from both the EU and UN, is the need for aging Western populations to be cared for in old age, for more workers to generate more taxes so as to maintain pension levels, as well as what appears to be the main reason of the supposedly dramatic fall in Western birth rates in recent years. But nowhere in their argument is the mention of providing better quality and standard of living for native populations to start families, as well as have the option to have large numbers of offspring, as proven to be possible from the examples of Hungary and Russia. On the contrary, mass immigration of the Third World is proving to have disastrous consequences, while exacting huge tolls on Western nations in terms of housing, welfare as well as culture clashes, leading to social breakdown, resulting in religious, sexual and other forms of violence. The examples of Britain, Sweden, France and Germany are proof positive of this, and yet the Irish political establishment still continue to follow UN and EU wishes lockstep, ever at the detriment to the Irish nation. Ireland is far too small and unique a country to accommodate such rapid changes, already visible as of 2024. The situation of both mass immigration, legal and international protection based, if continued, will irrevocably change Ireland and the Irish nation forever. The ongoing mass immigration situation, as of 2024, sees the government continue the rhetoric of obligations to take in refugees. This official line, day by day, is beginning to unravel in many ways, as informed and educated sources come forward to debunk this claim, while revealing a much larger plan to be at play. Those of the mainstream media not towing the establishment line have come to reveal major offshore tax haven activity taking place, regarding the public monies being given by Roderick O'Gorman and his department to those providing housing, from major hotel chains to various property owners, both nationally and internationally. Irish taxpayer monies being siphoned offshore by involved parties reveals the true intent of this arm of the mass immigration scam being perpetrated on the Irish nation. A massive transfer of wealth from the ordinary tax-paying public to elite and wealthy tax haven clients. Apart from the now obvious fact of being an act of blatant corruption and violation of the public contract, Roderick O'Gorman and other ministers facilitating this wealth transfer still try to hide behind the line of international obligations. They appear ardent to see out this mass immigration and population target for the country as part of their 2040 plan, while, unsurprisingly by now, keeping in lockstep with UN and EU arguments of the First World needing Third World immigration for aging, population, and declining birth rates. As of 2024, the establishment of uni-parties willingly and intentionally signed over border sovereignty to the EU, foregoing an opt-out clause. A deep dive as to how the establishment appear to be orchestrating and managing this plan begins with again looking toward the tax haven system, more specifically the corporate tax windfalls being made from foreign direct investment, making up a substantial percentage of state budget. Over the last 10 years, spending on what are termed additional departments, rivaling that of social welfare and health, have seen a dramatic rise in cost of 253%. In the latest 2024 government budget, €3.3 billion has been allocated to equality and inclusion initiatives, a staggering amount. €3.2 billion was also made out for specialist community, disability-based services, implementation of action plan for disability services, as well as support for LGBTI, women, Roma and traveller communities. Also included is €2.15 billion for the fair and efficient system for international protection seekers, being allocated to IPAS accommodation, legal responsibilities, funding initiatives for integration of IPAS persons, as well as international protection child payments. A €1.4 billion amount was allocated for diversity, equity and inclusion under the heading of children and young people. Having received a windfall of €24 billion in 2023, a clue as to how over-reliant the uniparty establishment are upon the tax haven model reveals itself in how they allocate corporate taxes toward department spending, as just shown, as the benefits of such should ideally and rightly keep taxes low for workers, while providing a society of high-quality health, as well as other public services, of which Ireland clearly does not. As Ireland benefits from better demographics than larger countries, such as the UK and US, due to lower population numbers depending on government services. So where else, apart from the areas already examined, is all this corporate tax money going? The answer is simply the government itself, as annual expenditure has risen from €70 billion to a staggering €120 billion over the last decade. with the four main areas of expenditure being social protection, health, additional departments, as well as debt servicing and EU payments. One constantly contentious area of the Irish state is that of housing. So much so, it has recently been given its own department, yet evidence reveals it to be an issue the uni-party establishment continue unable to get a grasp on. This is of course by their own design, having handed over the task of providing the majority of housing to the private sector, while housing numbers continue to remain drastically out of step with the rapid rise in population. Latest figures show social housing to be at a cost of €7.93 billion annually. This is to cover the areas of homelessness, social housing, and housing-assisted payments, and yet the country has a chronic housing and homeless crisis, even with such a large budget, persistently unresolved. All the while, housing affordability continues to worsen, with the ratio of house price to income skyrocketing to over 27%, compared to the OECD average of just over 4%. Immigration is indeed an obvious factor, despite prominent voices of the political left spectrum arguing and denying to be the case. For example, with non-Irish immigrants currently standing at around 13% of the population, receiving a hefty 37% in overall housing-assisted payments. One final area of curious note is that of debt servicing and EU payments, having a latest budget of around €14.9 billion, with the largest part of this amount going toward what is labelled other non-voted expenditure, being the salaries of judges, ministers, and that of the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council costs, among others. In summary, despite significant proportions of the budget going to social spending, social programs, migrant-related costs, as well as housing initiatives, major issues of housing affordability persist. This causes a knock-on effect on quality of living, and at worst forced emigration. All the while, the reckless open borders and rate of immigration continues to be ignored and underplayed by the uni-party establishment, as well as other vested interests of NGOs and other activists. Is this massive increase in department spending perhaps a massive gamble or a calculated risk by the uni-party establishment? Is it part of their plans for the future of the country, in hoping to reap the rewards of this investment, that importing the Third World will fruition to a worthwhile skilled labour force that contribute? Clear evidence from other European countries proves otherwise, as systemic multiculturalism on Western nations continues to be a proven and abject failure. The historic timeline of corruption, cronyism, greed, and incompetence of the legacy political parties controlling the Irish nation must end. Driven by ideologies of Marxism, communism, and crony capitalism perpetrated by party loyalty and parish pump politics, will they continue to shape the country to their narcissistic visions, regardless of electorate protest and objections, behaving less like democratically elected public servants, and entirely to the attitude of tin pot, anarcho-tyrannical despots, while continuing to grant themselves pay levels and retirement perks wholly undeserved and disproportionate to the point of farcical, if not criminal. Having driven the country into dead ends of economic ruin time and time again, while subjecting the Irish nation to excessive taxes, extortionate cost of living, and the selling off and mismanagement of state resources, infrastructure and land. Their compensation for this has been to rely almost exclusively on the facilitation and cultivation of the tax haven and shadow banking global network, with the IFSC being among its most important hubs, causing true social and economic global injustice, beyond anything they may claim to pay lip service to in the public spotlight, as this network is among the main causes of global wealth inequity between developed and developing nations. Their devout loyalty to EU federalism has witnessed Irish national and state sovereignty, so hard fought and won for, and its historic legacy, be utterly betrayed. Their reckless and myopic attitude and facilitation of open borders in placating the wishes of the EU has witnessed Irish society continue to suffer through loss of standard of living, culture, community, and even lives. Only a change of the current establishment and the entire political landscape of the country will see a bright, hopeful and prosperous future for the Irish nation. Of late, a grassroots movement of nationalism and protest has been on the rise, though young and fledgling, is strong, with much growth ahead. The establishment, in their efforts to ignore or slander this movement, will ultimately fail in the long run, as Ireland is far too small a country. The race to rid the nation of their globalist fanaticism under the shackles of the EU and end their anarchy-tyrannical reign will perhaps be long and arduous, but not impossible.